Our Learning Through Place presentation explores the development of our group question, how does the replacement of the stained glass windows in St Mary Redcliffe Church reflect modern attitudes towards slavery in Bristol? This module has helped us to develop our abilities to create and explore different lines of inquiries, to develop our research methods and skills using rabbit holes. Our focus in this module and presentation began from a lecture early on in the course which told us about the history of forced labour in Bristol, with both online researching and our field trip in Bristol helping us to deepen our rabbit holes as our interest branched out beyond the origins of the transatlantic slave trade in Bristol. As we researched this, we began to look at key characters, specifically James Pinney and Edward Colston, and eventually we looked at Edward Colston's impacts on societal decisions in Bristol today.
Before we could fully immerse ourselves in our rabbit hole about Bristol, we first had to ground ourselves with the concept of place. We did this throughout the module through a number of mediums. The poem Bristol, Bristol was our first introduction to the theory of place, which showed one way in which places can be constructed. The Street by Perrick furthered this understanding by showing a different approach to constructing an image of a place. Finally, the recommended reading, Adams 2017, gave us an academic look at the concept, which the definition we arrived at was that place is a concept with constant causal chains radiating out, which impacts identity, politics, history, and even other places.
Slavery in Bristol became a major influence in the city after its involvement in the transatlantic trade of enslaved Africans, which started in 1698. This only faded out in 1807, with the Slavery Abolition Act being put in place in 1834. However, modern-day slavery is also evident in Bristol. We looked into how Lepresti ice cream underwent an investigation by the Cable spanning 5 years that led to modern-day slavery charges. Bristol Magistrates Court charged under the Modern Day Slavery Act of 2015 due to some workers saying that the pay they were receiving was as little as 55 pence an hour. ID documents were confiscated, physical abuse occurred, and mental manipulation such as threats of eviction were imposed. This showed us that slavery in Bristol has had a long and intricately detailed past, as well as its ongoing accounts.
As well as modern-day slavery, we are also interested in slavery of the past in Bristol. In our workshop, we looked through old shipping manuscripts, which shocked us, as humans were objectified into costs in stock takes. This raised questions about the valuation process of a slave and what variables could impact this. How does one value a human? The podcast furthered this interest, as we found out Pero cost Pinney £115 exactly, which made us even more curious about these questions. It also made us more curious about the wider economic ramifications of slavery within Bristol.
Therefore, when on the field trip, we decided to look into Bristol's slave history in greater depth. This led us to the M-Shed Museum, where we found key ideas on the image of the bricks, which showed us a typical configuration of how slaves would be arranged lying down to take advantage of the space, and shackles, which were used to control enslaved Africans on board slave ships whilst awaiting sale or on a plantation. These artifacts provided us with greater interest to look deeper into the root of slavery.
Whilst we were in the M-Shed, we also saw a quote by Pinney, which is displayed below on the slide, which brought us on to the next stage of our rabbit hole, as it got us very curious about the relationship between religion and slavery, as this was not a topic that we'd talked about much within the module. To follow this up, we went to Bristol's cathedral to get a sense of place and religion within the city.
Following the Piney quote, we found ourselves researching into Edward Colston's background, which was the next step in our rabbit hole. As by looking at the relationship between religion and slavery, we ended up looking into Colston, as he was a part of the slave trade business and also the Church of England. Colston was an English merchant, philanthropist, and member of the Conservative Party. Colston became both an investor and executive for the Royal African Company, RAC, which was the premier slave trading organisation that was based in Britain, and also held the monopoly of the England on the trading along the west coast of Africa, with also trading gold, silver, and ivory. Colston joined this organisation in 1680 and for the 12 years he worked there till 1692, there was an estimate of over 84,000 African men, women, and children from the Caribbean and the rest of America that were transported for slave trade, and sadly around 19,000 may have died while on the journey. These slaves would have been used for labour in the tobacco and sugar plantation industries. As Colston made loans to Bristol corporations of £1,800 and then became also an MP for Bristol from 1710 to 1713, there were many memorials of Colston for when he died on the 11th of October 1721. For example, there is Colston Tower in honour of his name, a window in the Bristol Cathedral, Colston Avenue and Colston Street were both named after him. However, due to the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020 after the George Floyd incident in America, with Colston being involved in the RAC, that caused major controversy as he was involved with many lives that were destroyed with the slave trade, meaning that they had to take action in protest. On the 7th of June 2020, the community decided to make the statement and topple down the statue.
Following on from our research into Colston's background, we decided to look into his presence in today's society. This involved creating a new line of inquiry which focused on the 2020 Black Lives Matter movement and protests, with our focus being on the large protests in Bristol. We then researched Colston's statue and the reasons why his statue was instated in the first place to further a line of inquiry about his presence in Bristol. We discovered how he was heavily involved in many charities in Bristol, donating generously throughout his life, and by the time he had died, he had donated in total around £71,000 to charity. We discovered this through online research after the Bristol field trip, and this gives some explanation to our line of inquiry about why Colston's statue was put up in the first place over 100 years after his death. From this research, we were able to realise why Colston was so heavily celebrated in Bristol, and this led us on to our next line of inquiry.
After looking at the Colston statue, we went back and spoke to our module lecturer about what impact the statue being torn down had elsewhere in Bristol. He told us to go and visit the St Mary Redcliffe Church, where prior to 2020, a stained glass window was displayed as a tribute to Colston. However, the Black Lives Matter movement led to this window being replaced, as citizens did not want to remember Colston in a positive light. This links back to the earlier penny quote we found in the M shed, exploring the relationship between religion and slavery and reflecting the church's view. As a result, in July 2022, St Mary's Redcliffe ran a competition to find designs for stained glass panels to replace the Edward Colston ones, with the aim to show hope in our future, as we found out by reading the signs in the church. A local junior doctor and artist called Elish Swift was selected as the winner, and their designs show the refugee crisis as well as the Bristol bus boycott. Jesus is also presented as multi-ethnic, showing diversity in society. Permission to install these windows was then given in March 2022, and by speaking to a member of staff at the church, we discovered that the new piece was not confirmed by the church until the 5th of November 2023. So it was not officially part of the building until then. This diagram shows all the steps which led us to our final research question. From initially becoming intrigued by slavery from a class workshop, to following this up by visiting the M shed on our field class to Bristol and finding the penny quote there, we became interested in religion's relationship with slavery. This then led us to look into slavery in Bristol in detail, focusing on Colston, and the impact his statue being torn down had on the local community, led us to the St Mary Redcliffe stained glass window, which was removed in the backlash of Colston in the Black Lives Matter movement. This line of inquiry made us reach our final research question, asking, how does the replacement of the stained glass window in St Mary Redcliffe reflect modern attitudes towards slavery in Bristol?